Showtime! Welcome to the show. I'm Brent Holland, and welcome to Night Fright. I'm going to read something for you right now, folks. It is 100% documented fact. The bulletin was sent out at 2:26 p.m. Roswell time, July 8th, 1947. That's right, we're going to be looking at Roswell tonight. Roswell, New Mexico. The Army Air Forces here today announced a flying disc had been found on a ranch near Roswell and is in Army possession. The intelligence office reports that it gained possession of the disc through the cooperation of a Roswell rancher and Sheriff George Wilson of Roswell. The disc landed on a ranch near Roswell sometime last week. Not having phone facilities, 1947, folks, in the rural areas, very few people had phones. The rancher, whose name has not been released, as I turn the page, stored the disc until such time as he was able to contact the Roswell Sheriff's Office. The Sheriff's Office, in turn, notified a major at the 509th Intelligence Office. Now, the reason why I mention this is because the 509th was the folks in the Army Air Force. Don't forget, it was not the Air Force at that time. It was still the Army Air Force. It would only become the Air Force in about a year's time. Where these folks were in charge of the atomic bomb group. Action was taken immediately, and the disc was picked up at the rancher's home and taken to Roswell Air Base. Following examination, the disc was flown by intelligence officers in a super fortress, that's a big B-29 in those days, to an undisclosed higher headquarters. And that's in quotation marks. Yeah. Higher power, folks. The airbase has refused to give details of construction of the disc or its appearance. Residents near the ranch on which the disc was found, this is important, reported seeing a strange blue light several days ago, about 3 o'clock in the morning. And that's where it ends. Folks, if you're recognizing our guest tonight, his name is Stanton Friedman. He is a legend, folks. Anytime you see anything on UFOs on the television, you're going to see Stanton Friedman because he is the father of Roswell. He's also a proud Canadian and a proud American. He has dual citizenship. He's joining us tonight, folks. Don't go anywhere. He's live on Skype from Fredericton, New Brunswick. It's going to be an incredible show, folks. Stick around for this. Strap in and hang on. Here we go.
There is a time to question. There is a time for answers. There is a time to challenge. There is a time to speculate. There is a time for change. There is a time for truth. The time is now. Welcome to Night Fright, your voice in the dark for paranormal and conspiracy radio. And now your host, Brent Holland.
Welcome. I'm Brent Holland. Welcome to Night Fright. Tonight, folks, we're going back to 1947. We're going to go forward maybe a billion years. We're going everywhere in outer space tonight. We're staying right here planted on Earth. If you're just joining us, we're going to be talking about Roswell. That's right, folks, that alien crash that took place in New Mexico. Settle in, get comfy, get the tea going, get the coffee going, get whatever beverage you would like to drink tonight. Get a nice warm cognac going if you want. Stick your feet up, enjoy this show. This is what this time is for you as I struggle to get my words out. If you're driving on the 401, ease off the gas pedal. We're going to take you on an incredible journey tonight. One that's going to actually stimulate you without question and get you thinking outside the box. I want to welcome Stanton Friedman to the show for the third time actually, Stan. Thank you for joining us. How are things in Fredericton tonight?
Well, it's a beautiful day. We're expecting snow in a couple days. The temperature was down, to 20 degrees this morning. It was warm for this time of year, but pleasant and bright. We're expecting the snow, though.
Okay, let's jump in right away, shall we? Roswell, New Mexico. There's a lot of folks that are joining us tonight, primarily students, because a lot of students watch this show. They have already heard perhaps a rumor or two about Roswell, but they don't know basically what happened. Can we just go through a brief synopsis, perhaps a Reader's Digest version of what happened in 1947?
Yeah, we need a little setting information. In the summer of 47, what really got the UFO business started, if you will, happened on June 24th, when Kenneth Arnold had his famous sighting of 9 objects moving across the sky up near Mount Rainier, Washington. He was a pilot, an experienced pilot. He didn't know what these things were, but he timed their passage, 9 of them, snaking their way between the mountains up there. And he knew the distance between 2 of the mountains. He timed from one to the other. The darn things were going more than 1,200 miles an hour, which was quite extraordinary because the speed record at that time was under 700 miles an hour. And the first supersonic flight wasn't until a few months later that same year, Yeager's first flight with a rocket plane. So Ken had stopped, was moving along looking, he had stopped, but looking for a downed aircraft. There'd been an airplane crash, and there was a reward for finding it. Rugged hit mountains up there. And so that's why he was kind of hanging around. He wasn't just zipping by. He was looking to see if he could find the wreckage. And so when he spotted these things and he timed them, and he even opened the window to make sure he wasn't seeing a reflection, he was at about 9,000, 10,000 feet. And when he landed, he told people about this. And his thought was, gee, there's no tail, there's no visible engines. This must be a new secret system that the government had been working on. After all, the atom bomb program was secret, a lot of other stuff going on. There would be no surprise. So he talked to people about it, and the word spread. The people where he landed knew him. This was not an irresponsible character, a bum moving down the street. He was somebody known to those people in Yakima, Washington. And within a few days, there were sightings all over the country, which came as quite a surprise. He used the term, they moved as a saucer would if you skipped it across the water, which is not the standard way airplanes move.
That's right.
If you've watched a rock, and a flat rock and throw it, it sort of bounces along. Yeah. And so the press picked up on the term flying saucer. The word UFO was not in common usage until several years later. Anyway, that was the background. And there was a lot of excitement about this. I mean, the war had ended 2 years before, but, what's going on? That's kind of the idea. And then came Roswell. Just a couple of weeks later, and a rancher named Mac Brazel, who operated the Foster Ranch, late at night, probably the 3rd or the 4th, we don't know, of July, heard a big explosion. He didn't think it was thunder. There was a storm going on. They get some vicious storms in New Mexico, and the cold air from the Gulf and the warm air from the West, and I've been there in hailstorms that dented my car, stuff like that. And so he heard this explosion. Okay, the next day, he goes out to check on the sheep. Water is a primary concern down there. It's really desert, no trees around. And he goes over to a place and sees that his sheep are not crossing an area of wreckage, a debris field. And that's what bothered him, that the sheep weren't going to the water. And it was this weird wreckage, and it covered a large area, maybe 3/4 of a mile long, a few hundred yards wide. Well, when he went into town on the 5th, town of Corona, which is actually the nearest town to this, at the general store there, where he normally did his shopping once a week, into the store, he was telling people about the crazy debris. He had brought some of it with him. And they told him he didn't get a newspaper, he didn't have a telephone, he didn't have electricity, didn't have central plumbing. You know, we're talking rural New Mexico.
Precisely.
I've been out there and there isn't much around, you know. And they told him that people have been seeing these flying saucers. And more importantly, there was a reward being offered for wreckage from one, piece of one. And they all said, you ought to go into the sheriff's office, take some of that stuff with you and collect the reward. He didn't have a lot of money. He didn't own the ranch. He just operated it, you understand. So on the 6th of July, he went into Roswell, about 75 miles away. Much of it, first 10 miles, no roads, cross country. He had an old pickup truck, drove into town, went to the sheriff's office, Sheriff Wilcox, not Wilson, incidentally.
Oh.
And you'll find the officer released the press release, Walter Hout, his name is spelled 4 different ways in newspapers of the time. So you got to, you know, press was different back then. You didn't have 24-hour news services and stuff like that. Anyway, went to the sheriff's office. The sheriff, by prearrangement, called the base. He was supposed to notify them of anything that happened that might concern them, maybe a drunken airman or an accident or people, you know, a disturbance at a bar, or whatever it was. Colonel Blanchard, the base commander, wanted good relations with the town. Roswell had maybe 25,000 people there, and there were a few thousand working at the base, you understand. This was the most elite military group in the world. They dropped the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. That was in 45. In 46, they exploded 2 bombs at Operation Crossroads in the Pacific, 2 atomic bombs. And so these were hand-picked officers, hand-picked men. This wasn't a bunch of dinks sitting around with nothing else to do.
And
they
also,
had atomic bombs.
And also, Stan, I just want the folks watching right now to understand now the atomic bomb security is heightened because this is the beginning of the Cold War, don't forget. And if there's any threat of any, I use the word alien, but, you know, they were worried about the Soviets coming over too and perhaps stealing, you know, so you have to understand, I'm trying to put you in the time so you can understand fully what a threat this was and why it gets shoved up to the realms of the higher echelons of government, as you'll see.
Yeah, I mean, the sheriff calls the base, talks to Jesse Marcel, who was the base intelligence officer, Major Marcel, and the duty officer, it was a Sunday, and he talks to his boss, Colonel Blanchard, and goes in to check out this wreckage to the sheriff's office. It's less than 10 miles. And when he gets there, he sees this stuff, and as he told me, I was the first one to talk to him in 1978, you understand, a lot of years later. There wasn't anything conventional. Here's this pile of, call it wreckage, but Jesse had been at aircraft accidents, crashes in the Pacific. He fought in the war there, the 509. And so Colonel Blanchard gives Jesse instructions. And this relates to what you just said. Take our counterintelligence corps officer with you and follow the rancher out to the place, because the rancher had said there was a lot of this stuff out there and didn't have GPS back there. No way to tell anybody, you know, here are the coordinates, I'll see you out there. They had to follow the rancher out. Like I said, there's no forests around that area, so
it's pure desert, folks.
Desert. Yeah, and there were rattlesnakes and scorpions and, you know, low bushes and a lot of sand. So they follow the rancher out. He lets them stay in a little, I'll call it a shack, overnight in their sleeping bags. And the next day, he takes him out to the debris field. And that's where Jesse sees all his stuff out there. He and a man named Cabot, the counterintelligence corps guy, Cabot, everybody called him, Sheridan W. Cabot. And they didn't report through the same chain of command. Intelligence was a big thing at the base. And the reason for sending him is, who is spying on us? What else is there to do down that part of the country? And I should add that After all, New Mexico had more classified work going on than any place else. They not only had the Sandia nuclear base, the nuclear weapons lab, and Los Alamos nuclear weapons lab, and Kirtland Air Force Base, which was the largest employer in the state, and Roswell, the home of the 509, which was not a trivial base. They had wound up having a 13,000-foot runway, incidentally, which is huge. 6 feet thick. That was for B-36s later on. But I'm saying this was a central military important base. And so both Cavett and Marcel brought carloads of the stuff back. And Jesse stopped at his home late at night on Monday, the 7th, and showed his 11-year-old son, who is now a medical doctor, retired colonel in the military, been a flight surgeon and so forth, but served on aircraft accident investigative teams later on, shows his son and his wife pieces of the stuff that he had in the car. It was very lightweight. It was very strange. I'd never seen anything like it. Jesse Sr. stressed to me that nothing conventional. When you have an airplane crash, you have vacuum tubes, you have propellers, you have rivets, you have tags say made in Oshkosh, all kinds of stuff. Aircraft crashes were not that unusual. And so the next morning at the base meeting, their normal staff meeting in the morning, Colonel Blanchard gave 2 orders. You might say they changed history. One of them was to Jesse to get one of our B-29s and take this stuff to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. That's where captured enemy equipment normally went. Make a stop at our headquarters in Fort Worth, Texas. The 509th was part of the 8th Air Force. Headquarters of the 8th Air Force was in Fort Worth, and it's right on the way if you look at a map. The second order he gave was to Walter Haupt, the base public information officer, who had also been a bombardier navigator, flown 20 missions during the war on them. And so this was not a dink in off the street, hey, write press releases for us. That's not what we're talking about here. And he told Walter what to say in a press release, which led to the article you read and coverage across the country in evening newspapers from Chicago West. And I put it that way because the press release, because of the time change, New Mexico was on mountain time, came out too late, around noontime, for the East Coast papers. So you won't find anything in the New York Times. But the evening papers, Chicago Daily News and Sacramento Bee and San Francisco paper and the Los Angeles paper and a whole bunch of others, have the stories. As a matter of fact, the Los Angeles Herald had the story, Army captures flying saucer, general thinks it's radar weather gadget. This is all across the whole front of the page. Had both stories. All the others just had, we grabbed the flying saucer. The next day's paper all said, Ramey empties Roswell saucer. General says it's just a radar weather gadget. And pretty much that was the end of that. Now, when I heard about this, I really didn't know anything about it. I've been into UFOs for a long time, but 1978, I'm at a television station in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, to do 3 interviews.
Can you hang on a sec, Stan? I'm just looking at the time.
Sure.
I just want to tell folks who we're speaking with, folks, I'm riveted to the seat because we're hearing the true story of Roswell from the father of Roswell tonight. He's a living legend. Stanton Friedman is joining us tonight. He's via Skype from Fredericton, New Brunswick. I just want to mention a few of the books he has. If you go to the www.nightfrightshow.com website, click on the book cover that's associated with tonight's guest. That'll take you right to a spot where you can pick some of these books up. One of them is Science is Wrong, UFOs and Aliens, Flying Saucers and Science, Captured, top secret, majestic, and we're going to be getting to the MJ-12 document soon enough. Crash at Corona, and that's basically what we're talking about right now, because as Stanton has just said, it didn't really crash at Roswell. It crashed, I think it was 70 kilometers north in Corona, if I'm not mistaken. Approximately
near Corona.
Nearer
about
Corona.
30 miles from Corona, about 75 miles from Roswell, in the middle of nowhere.
And
I really mean nowhere.
Oh, absolutely. And folks, Flying Saucers Are Real and MJ-12 are two videos as well, and also Stanton's URL to his website, which is a wealth of information, folks. He's a legend. He's a living legend, folks, we have tonight, and he's gracious enough to come on our show. Isn't that terrific? Sorry to interrupt you, my friend. I just wanted to tell folks who we're speaking with.
So the press release went out, the story got carried and then denied, basically, oh, sorry, we made a mistake. And that was the end of that, although the story went even overseas. Papers in China and England and it was all over the place.
Oh, really?
And I had one guy who is now serving in the U.S. Senate, I think, in Minnesota, on a strange television show that I did, said, well, it couldn't have been a big story. It only appeared in a Roswell paper. I had sent his group of people half a dozen front pages of newspapers across the country, including the Chicago Daily News, the Los Angeles Herald Examiner, the Sacramento Bee, San Francisco Chronicle, a whole bunch of papers. And he said it only appeared in Roswell. What can you say? The typical critics, remember, don't bother me with the facts, my mind's made up. And the reason I heard about this case, and I've had people say, why did all those guys go running to you, Friedman? They didn't. I had to find them. It was at the television station in Baton Rouge. I was to speak at Louisiana State University that night, 1978. And I was supposed to do 3 interviews. I'd done the first 2, and the third reporter was nowhere to be found. No cell phones back then. So the station manager, he knows the people who brought me to the station. He knows I've got other things too, but he wants to get the interview. So he's giving me coffee and looking at his watch. He's embarrassed, frankly. And out of the blue, he changed my life forever. He said, the guy you really ought to talk to is Jesse Marcel. And being the great UFO expert I am, I said, who's he? His next sentence changed my life. He said, he handled wreckage of one of those saucers you were interested in when he was in the military. What? Total shock. I dropped my teeth. Had my own then, but... well, tell me about him. What do you know about him? He said he lives in Houma. I didn't know where Houma was. It's in Louisiana. I've been there since to talk to Jesse. He's a great guy. We're ham radio buddies. That was their connection. Mm-hmm. Jesse had been a ham for a very long time. And so he says, you really ought to talk to him. And then the third reporter shows up. Okay, I'm busy the rest of the day. Things went very well that night at LSU. The next morning from the airport, I had a little extra time. I got there early. And I said, what the heck, let's try. So I called information in Houma, still not knowing where it was, you understand. And there was a listing for a Jesse A. Marcel, and I talked to him. And I mentioned the television station guy's name. And Jesse is one of the few people who couldn't deny his involvement. His picture was in many newspapers with his name. So he couldn't say, I had nothing to do with that. Well, the proof is there that he did. So he told me his story and about being the duty officer and so forth and so on. He didn't have the precise day of the year. He didn't say July 8th. He obviously wasn't prepped to talk to somebody about something he hadn't talked to anybody about for years. And incidentally, he hadn't talked really to the station manager. The station manager had seen the article in the New Orleans paper. And later on, when they were ham radio talking, he asked Jesse about it. And I found this out from the station manager. I didn't get this from Jesse. I asked the station manager, Bill Allen. What did he tell you? He told me I can't talk about that. He didn't say anything. So Jesse wasn't running at the mouth about this great experience at all. And he had told his son, Jesse Jr., after he came back from Texas, not to talk about it. See, it wasn't classified at the beginning. Who knows? It's probably an airplane in the wrong place. No big deal. As soon as it becomes mysterious, then Jesse Sr. tells Jesse Jr., we can't talk about this. And being a good Air Force kid, and I get a kick out of the way the press handles some of this. And Jesse Jr. was interviewed for Peter Jennings' mockumentary back in February 24th, 2005. And they talked to him. He was on leave at the time. He'd been called back into the military at age 68, mind you, because he was a flight surgeon, and flight surgeons were in high demand.
Now talk about credibility, folks. Age 68 and the government wants you back. That's credibility. And speaking of credibility, for those of you that doubt Stanton's credibility, I erred to mention nuclear physicist, Stanton Friedman. Sorry, Stan.
Well, they interviewed him for the Peter Jennings mockumentary in Roswell. He was back on leave. They interviewed me too. They interviewed me for an hour. I got 20 seconds. Jess got about 2 minutes. They never mentioned that he was a servant colonel in the military. He did 225 combat hours in Iraq. He was a flight surgeon, the colonel, a medical doctor. Now, it seems to me that's credible, no matter how you slice it. But they didn't bother to mention that. So it's a pet peeve of mine that they call people experts, but the people who were really involved, they don't give their credentials. They didn't call me a scientist. They called me an operator 3 times in 20 seconds. It's an aggravation.
Yeah.
Anyway, I shared the story with other people, Bill Moore in particular. We went at it. I had a second story. I was in Minnesota. After a lecture, somebody comes up to me at Bemidji State College, incidentally. Ever hear anything about a crash saucer in New Mexico? Well, yes, I have. Tell me more. And he tells me a story about their good friends, Barney Barnett, who had told him and his wife about a crash in New Mexico. And he gave me the name of Barney's niece. Barney was dead, so I couldn't talk to him.
Stanton,
and Bill Moore.
I just wanted to ask you now, when they approached you, were you skeptical at all? I guess what I'm trying to do is get folks to understand why you were into the UFO phenomena. And I don't mean to call it a phenomena, but what got you started along that path line so that when these people approached you, you didn't just brush them off as the same way that Peter Jennings was trying to make light,
well, yeah,
I guess.
I got interested in 1958, read a book, read 15 more books. Didn't give my first lecture until 1967.
Okay.
So I'd already given hundreds of lectures all over the place. And I was skeptical because there'd been a story that got a lot of airtime about a guy telling about buddies from Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, a guy named Carr, a crash saucer story from a guard and so forth. And it turned out to be baloney. So I was very skeptical about any story. On the other hand, this one, once I talked to Jesse, that makes it reasonable. And then Bill, I had the second story. Bill had a third story. The Flying Saucer Review in England had carried a story about an English actor driving across the United States from Los Angeles to Philadelphia, and in New Mexico hearing on the radio about a crash saucer.
Huey Green.
And he thought there would be a big deal. By the time he got to Philadelphia, it would be a great story. There was nothing.
Was he not a Canadian? And he had gone to Britain?
His son was Canadian.
I'm sorry. Okay.
His son was Canadian. Bill talked to the son and was able to pin down a date because it wasn't a trip you made very often back then. You can imagine what the roads were like back in 1947. He said early July 1947. Bill went to the University of Minnesota Library, periodicals department, started looking in the newspapers. There was a story. Verified what Jesse had said, gave us a bunch of names, and in the next year and a half, we found 62 people connected with this story. Now, sure, we got lucky. I looked in editor and publisher. What do I know about Roswell, New Mexico? And, they have a newspaper, Roswell Daily Record. So I called them. As a matter of fact, they'd had 2. I called them and said, I'd like to talk to the editor from 1947. Well, he's long gone. What can we do for you? And so I've got a story here that says that the base public information office, I didn't know the base had been closed in the mid-60s. A guy named Walter Howe taught, like I said, it was spelled 4 different ways. Before I could finish the sentence, the woman I'm talking to says, oh, his wife works here. What? You don't expect a GI from Chicago, as it happens, who serves in Roswell, New Mexico in 1947 to still be there in 1978, but he was. And so I talked to the wife, and then I talked to Walter, great guy, very well thought of in the community, and I asked a lot of people. And he had a base yearbook. He knew Jesse Marcel. He and Colonel Blanchard were good buddies. He drove Blanchard's wife to Chicago when she was visiting family. And, you know, he was a really big help, and he helped set up the museum, which is still there in Roswell, the International UFO Museum and Research Center. I'll be speaking there in early July. And so by 1980, the first book came out, The Roswell Incident by William Moore and Charles Berlitz. Bill and I did 90% of the research. We kept at it. By 1986, we found 92 people. And my book didn't come out until the late 90s, Crash at Corona. And other people, Don Schmidt and others have, Kevin Randall, have contributed books. And there have been some crummy books by people who do their homework at home, make up things because they know there's nothing to it, you know. And as a matter of fact, I am pleased to inform you that hopefully this coming year, a contract the contract's been executed, but now we got to find the money to make the movie. My book, Top Secret Magic, has been optioned, along with my life story, for whatever that's worth. And the book, UFO Crash at Roswell, Roswell UFO Witness by Don Schmidt and Tom Carey. They've optioned the books and our life stories, and they're going to make a dynamite movie that'll be like All the President's Men, you know, and a little JFK mixed in there. And Richard Dreyfuss is going to play me, I keep saying. We don't know that at all. No, that's a rumor.
I thought it was going to be Whoopi Goldberg, no?
I don't think so.
No, okay, I'm just teasing you.
It's, well, I hate to admit this, with 5 books after my name, more people watch movies than read books, darn it.
Yep.
So, you know, it could be a real opportunity. And if anybody wants to help pay for a Hollywood movie,
well, I'll tell you what, Stan.
They can reach me on the website. They can find me. You know?
I'll tell you what, Stan. I actually compose music for television and film, and I'm working on a feature film starring a Hollywood feature starring Martin Sheen right now. So I'm a professional composer. Forget paying for a composer. I'll do it for free.
Okay, I'll tell the guy in charge, Bryce Zabel, who did Dark Skies, incidentally.
So there's one
Most
less expense. Oh, is that right? Yeah. So there's one less expense. You don't have to pay for a composer. And I'm a Canadian too, so you'll get that tax credit as well. I didn't mean to get off track. Just let me tell folks who we're speaking with. Folks, incredible show tonight, incredible guest, a living legend. Stanton Friedman's with us tonight. Stanton Friedman, of course, folks, is the father of Roswell, New Mexico, 1947, where there was a downed alien spacecraft, and where apparently there was bodies all around too. We're going to get to that. So stick around if you're just joining us. Lots of time left. We're just past the halfway mark. Get the coffee going, get the tea going. www.nightfrightshow.com, www.nightfrightshow.com. If you're joining us on the radio, on television, right around the country. His books are Science is Wrong, UFOs and Aliens, Flying Saucers and Science, Captured, Top Secret Magic. Thank you, my friend. Crash at Corona, and he's got videos out. One of them is called Flying Saucers Are Real, and MJ-12. Easy way to get to his website. Just go to the www.nightfrightshow.com website. Click on the link that's right there. That'll take you right to Stan's website. And the reason why I mentioned my website is because I try to make it a focal point for folks So you just
Sure.
automatically go there and off you go.
Get all the
Stanton,
goodies.
all the goodies. And he's a nuclear physicist. He's worked on top secret projects himself, which he is sworn to keep quiet. I'm just teasing him. But no, this is serious.
I did work under security for 14 years.
That's right. And I was making jest, but there is a truth in that too. And I was speaking with Stan earlier on this week, and one of the things I admire about Stan is you get the real deal from Stan. You don't get any, like the JFK researchers I have on, nobody's in this for the buck. There's no private jets here. There's no wonderful big long stretch limousines, as Stan will tell you. Most folks put out their research in a book. If they break even, they're happy. And Stan is the real deal. He does honest research, as he said before. He goes out there and interviews these folks. Full kudos to him. Full kudos. And he's a Canadian and with American dual citizenship.
Citizen, yeah.
There you go.
I can complain about both governments. Perfectly legal.
And God knows there's a lot there to complain about. Let's go.
I should mention that
Please do.
Among the companies I've worked for are General Electric,
right.
Westinghouse, General Motors, Aerojet General Nucleonics, TRW Systems, McDonnell Douglas. I worked on more canceled government-sponsored advanced research and development programs than anybody. A dubious distinction, but it's mine. And incidentally,
Please.
one of the things I bring to the subject a couple of peculiarities. One of them is having worked under security for 14 years and having visited 20 archives. I understand how security works. I get some people telling me all kinds of nonsense. Well, everything's declassified after 20 years. Not true. If you have a top secret clearance, you can see everything that's top secret. Not true. You need a need to know. And I get a lot of people with strange... Governments can't keep secrets. And an outstanding astronomer,
Sure they can.
Dr. Tyson, from the Hayden Planetarium in New York, he gave a big lecture in which he pointed out governments can't keep secret. After all, the proof of that is look how much we know about President Clinton's genitalia. Like that has something to do with keeping secrets. Dr. Seth Shostak with the SETI movement has said governments can't keep secret. I mean, it's the same government that had FEMA and Katrina. What's that got to do with the NSA, the NSC, the DIA, the CIA, the NRO, etc.? So I do understand. Another thing that I bring to the story is that I worked on far-out propulsion systems. You'll always hear people's noisy negativists saying, you can't get here from there. Don't you know how far it is and all that sort of stuff, how much energy it will take? I worked on nuclear fission rockets. We tested some. The biggest one, about 8 feet in diameter, power level 4,400 megawatts. That's twice Grand Coulee Dam, incidentally. I worked on fusion rockets, only a study there. But nuclear fusion is what drives the universe. All the stars get their energy from nuclear fusion. So every civilization is going to know about it. We find out in 1938. We figured it out. We put it to use naturally. In 1952, we exploded our first H-bomb. Released the energy of 10 million tons of TNT. 10 million tons. And if you kick particles out the back end of a fusion rocket, you can get 10 million times as much energy per particle as they can get in the dumb old chemical rocket. So when people say you can't get here from there, that's like saying you can't go from Fredericton to San Francisco in less than a week because that's how fast my bicycle goes. It's absurd.
Absolutely.
So, and the third thing is that because I've given over 700 lectures in all 50 states, all 10 Canadian provinces, and 18 other countries, I've been asked a lot of questions, great many questions. And so I'm ready to answer those, as I have to be. People accept the facts and data because they haven't heard them before. I checked. How many of you read each of the 5 large-scale scientific studies I talk about? It's less than 2%. But what they really want to know, okay, they got the data. They want to know the answers to the why questions. Why would aliens come here? Why don't they land on the White House lawn? There are a number of sort of dumb questions like that. I call that a dumb questions because the President of the United States doesn't speak for 7 billion Earthlings, in case anybody hadn't noticed that. And besides, it's a no-fly zone over the White House. They did get seen in 1952. Lots of sightings over Washington D.C.
That's right.
But,
that was good, Stanton. Like that.
What I like is the fact that I have found I've only had 11 hecklers in over 700 lectures.
It's not bad.
And 2 of them were drunk. And I'm told you'll get more than that if you talk about sports, religion, politics. Of course, I don't talk about those things. But so I've been out there. I've had a chance to interact with lots of people, including some professors who try to set me up with a little afternoon session of physics colloquium, telling the students, boy, they're going to show them what kind of nut this guy must be if he's talking about flying saucers. And I take great pleasure in doing something on flying saucers and physics and talk about things like the nuclear rockets. You're all familiar with this, aren't you? No. I talk about nuclear propulsion in a different way. Everybody's heard about nuclear submarines. I wonder how many people know that the United States has nuclear-powered aircraft carriers that can operate for 18 years without refueling. That's a little different than having a guy drive his ship full of gas up for you. So I get a kick out of this stuff. And also I find that people they're very interested in this subject, but they're very fearful of ridicule. That's the big problem. At the end of my lectures, I ask how many people here believe they've seen what I would consider to be a flying saucer, having defined my terms at the beginning. And I'll make a joke, we didn't let the CIA in. It's okay, just raise your hand and I'll point and count. And I do that. The hands go up reluctantly, like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. By the time I get to the other side of the hall, they go up vigorously. Each one thought he was the only one. Now they see this whole bunch of hands. Typically, it's 10%. So if I've got 500 people in an audience, I've had 2,000. But even with only 500, that's 50 sightings.
That's right.
And then I ask, how many of you reported what you saw? 90% of the hands go down. Not surprising. And when I talk to people after my lecture, they got to tell me. They're so anxious. They know I'm not going to laugh. Did you report this case? No. Why not? They think I was some kind of a nut. So I'm trying to lift the laughter curtain, the fear of ridicule. And incidentally, if there are enough people, I'll ask the next step, how many of you were in the military at the time? They still got some hands. You want to tell us about it? One guy in front of 1,300 people said, I can't. They told me not to say anything, which was a great line.
Really?
That was in Texas.
Wow.
Another one said they took my pictures. Silence. So I said, look, I'm sure you don't need to stand up. I'm not asking your name, but I'm sure the audience would like to hear the rest of the story. Everybody claps. So he remained seated. He was flying a 4-engine aircraft for the Air Force over the Pacific. Another plane 20 miles ahead radioed back, saucer heading your way. They had gun cameras. They took pictures. They called the base to which they were flying because they don't handle the film. That's intelligence stuff. The guys at the base handle that. They landed, the film was taken, they got debriefed and told never to say anything. And I'm sure that everybody in that room believed this guy. He obviously wasn't looking for attention, wasn't making a big thing out of it, didn't say his name, didn't stand up, but he came across as so solid and sincere. And you get enough stories like that, it's impressive to an audience,
Absolutely.
So I'm lucky. I've been out there, and some people say, well, how come there are only sightings in the United States? Well, this past year, I spoke in Saudi Arabia, I spoke in Warsaw, Poland, I spoke in Sao Paulo, Brazil, St. John's, Newfoundland. I've spoken
Very famous one in Iran as well. Very famous one in Iran.
They're all, people are interested everywhere. And the thing is that we're at a cusp in time, if you will, a peculiar time. Nicolaus Copernicus, a gutsy Polish astronomer, had the gall to write a book in 1543 in which he, it's hard to believe, said that the Earth wasn't the center of the universe. The sun was. Now, he died that same year. The book was banned by the church for 300 years, and Giordano Bruno was burned at the stake for agreeing with Copernicus. We're just finding that, the sun isn't the middle of the universe either. We're not at the top of the heap. The recent data from Kepler, which excites me greatly, shows that there might be as many as 100 billion planets in just our galaxy. Now, contrast that with Frank Drake of the SETI movement, Silly Effort to Investigate, SETI, in case you hadn't heard that definition before. Frank was saying just a few years ago there might be as many as 8,000 places in the galaxy where they could send signals. From 8,000 to 100 billion in just a few years. So our concept of where we fit is changing. Our ego is in for trouble, of course. Also, you know, all this listening for radio signals. We've only had radio signals since about 1900 from Newfoundland, from England to Newfoundland, you know. Marconi, that guy. Anyway, that's 112 years ago. All right. The universe, our local galaxy, is billions of years old. If somebody else got started on his or her technological kick a little bit before we did, say only 1 million years, what does he know that we don't know? One heck of a lot is the answer. Why would he send signals to us using old-fashioned technology? I don't even use a slide rule anymore. And when I said that to two classes at University in Michigan,
what's a slide rule?
Reaction to the audience. I said, well, I was using a slide rule when I started work in industry. Finally hit me. Any of you know what a slide rule is? Not one student in the class knew. Boy, did I feel old. But that was, you know, less than 50 years. So what if somebody is 500, 5,000, 5 million years more advanced? They're certainly going to be using technology.
And, you know, Stan, we spoke about this the other day as well. I was on Skype to my nephew, who's at Stanford, and I'm going to brag about my 3 nephews real quick. I have a nephew that's in aerospace at Stanford, straight A's, and he's probably going to be working for NASA very soon, and the Canadian Space Agency has sent him everywhere. I have another one who's at McGill, who's in medicine, doing incredible, and another one who's straight A's in high school, and you just keep going, John. All that to say is I was speaking with Tyler and at Stanford, and he was on a train virtually going under the bay in San Francisco to visit his girlfriend at Berkeley. And I was speaking to him on his Android, and it was just incredible. Now, go back. I'm going back just to the 80s when I was in university myself. There was not a chance in hell we could even fathom something like that, a little handheld device. That was Star Trek. That was Fantasy Island, if you will. I just dated myself. So, again, if we can think forward a billion years, folks, 1 billion years, not, 5,000 years, 1 year, 2 years, and look at how technology's flipped just in the last 6 months. Think 1 billion years. We may be able just to manifest ourselves just by thinking about it, just by going somewhere. Maybe those Star Trek beam me up Scotty things will be real by then. Chances are they probably will be. We have to think outside the box. And bingo.
Incidentally,
please.
For those who wonder, that 1 billion years is not a joke. In my book with Kathleen Marden, Betty Hill's niece, the book has captured the Betty and Barney Hill UFO experience. Betty saw a map. A lot of work was done, a model on board the craft, and she drew it, and a lot of work was done to find out do those stars mean anything. Supposedly there were trade routes and occasional expeditions and so forth. A brilliant woman named Marjorie Fish built more than 23 three-dimensional models of our local galactic neighborhood. And to make a long story short, the base stars are Zeta 1 and Zeta 2 Reticuli. It's a constellation of reticulum. You got to go below the equator to see it. But here's the important thing. Those two stars just happen to be the closest to each other pair of sun-like stars in our entire local neighborhood. Next star to the sun is 5.4 light years away. Zeta 1 and Zeta 2 Reticuli are only 39 light years from us, just down the street, but they're only an eighth of a light year apart from each other. So they're more than 30 times closer to each other than the sun is to the next star over. We're out in the boonies.
Yeah.
I don't mean Fredericton, I mean Earth. And the interesting thing is those two stars are 1 billion years older than the sun, and just down the street. So we didn't know that before her work on the star map and all that sort of thing. But it gives you an entirely different perspective. Each star is visible all day long from the other star. And it would be very easy to discover whether there are planets and whether there's life on the planets, because it changes the emissions from the surface of the planet and all that sort of thing. So they would know. There would be far more incentive for interstellar travel when you got a next door neighbor than if you're out in the boonies.
That's right.
So it gives you an entirely different perspective.
And folks, Stanton Friedman's joining us tonight. We're talking about Roswell. We're talking about the possibilities of aliens visiting the planet, monitoring us, and there's good reason for that. As Stanton mentioned before, the atomic bomb went off, and let's face it, we are a species that is capable of so many positive things. We can go to the moon, we can entertain ideas to save humanity, and yet there are those of us that are still flying airplanes into buildings. There are those of us that still go around and strap bombs to themselves to kill our fellow man. So
we're a primitive society whose major activity is tribal warfare.
Bingo.
And I hate to remind young people, because maybe they've forgotten if they ever knew, in World War II alone, we Earthlings killed 50 million of our own kind. We have exploded 2,000 nuclear weapons. Fortunately, only 2 of them on people. But that gives you a picture of Earth, a primitive society, major activity, tribal warfare. And that's disturbing. People say, why would anybody come here? Because they don't want us to go out there is the obvious reason.
Yeah. We would be a real threat without question. Could you trust a species like that? A species, you mentioned the Second World War, the Holocaust, folks. A whole industry was set up by a quote-unquote highly civilized culture, the German culture, to kill people, to just not only Jews, efficiently, completely monitored, and body count and everything. How do you dispose of the bodies? How many per hour, etc., etc. A highly cultured society, one that gave us, dare I say, the ability to go to outer space. Now, talk about a dichotomy. So we have to understand where the threat is coming from, why we're probably being monitored, and with good reason. I mean, if we were to destroy our planet, what would happen to the universe if all of a sudden there's a void where our planet would be? Would there be ramifications? Of course there would. Everything is interconnected, and we have to be aware of that as well. Stanton Friedman, www.nightfrightshow.com. His books are Science is Wrong, UFOs and Aliens, Flying Saucers and Science, Captured, Top Secret, and Majestic, Magic. I did it again, Stan, and we're not going to get to Majestic 12 tonight. Crash at Corona, Flying Saucers Are Real, a couple of his videos. But I did promise the folks a little talk about bodies. The rumors were that there was alien bodies recovered at Roswell.
Yeah.
We've only got 4 minutes. Can we just cover that real quick?
Well, yeah, the stories came about later. One from the local undertaker who was called by the base. He knew the people out there to see if they had any body bags, any coffins, really, for little small beings. And he tried to get some more information, and they weren't telling him anything more. But we've heard from other people that there were 3 or 4 bodies recovered there, and we've heard from people who were on the planes that carried those bodies to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And it's kind of interesting, when I spoke in Dayton, not far down the street from Wright-Patterson, I signed books at a bookstore, and there were at least 6 people that came to me quietly to buy the book and to say that they had heard while working out at Wright-Patterson about the bodies that had been stored here. And as a matter of fact, you know that the Air Force explanation, one of the silliest explanations around for the stories about bodies, was crash test dummies. The Air Force dropped crash test dummies all over New Mexico, and that's what people were getting in their head about. Now, there are 2 problems with that. One, none were dropped until after 1953, so we have time travel by 6 years for crash test dummies, a neat trick. The second is I talked to the man who's in charge of the program. His picture's even in the Air Force report. They didn't talk to him for the report, interestingly enough. And I met with him personally in Albuquerque. And he stressed to me that for the test to be meaningful, the dummies had to be 6 feet tall and 175 pounds and in uniform to simulate an airplane guy having to get out of his jet at 40,000 feet. And so the uniform is not for show. It affects drag and heating and temperature and all this kind of thing. And so, and there are pictures of them. And as a matter of fact, at the Roswell Museum, there is one of these dummies there. Now, how you can morph that down to a little guy 4 feet tall with a big head and a skinny little body and no uniform for sure, like Air Force uniform, is a pretty neat trick. And I got that from the guy who was in charge of the program. He just recently died, incidentally. But, I mean, that's the lengths to which people will go to distort reality. 6 years is not an insignificant error in timing, you know? And let's face it, nobody, no rancher out there in the desert is going to stumble across a crash test dummy and think, an alien. Hard. You know what I mean. It
Absolutely. Doesn't make sense at all. Folks, Stanton Friedman has been our guest tonight. I want to thank him wholeheartedly for coming on the show. And Stan, I want to invite you back right away to talk about MJ-12 because they go part and parcel. And MJ-12, folks, just very quickly, it was a government committee set up under Truman to examine the Roswell crash, as well as bring recommendations on how to deal with aliens, and we're going to get to that next time. Stanton Friedman, www.nightfrightshow.com. His books are Science is Wrong, UFOs and Aliens, Flying Saucers and Science Captured, Top Secret Magic, Finally Get It Right, Crash at Corona, Flying Saucers Are Real, MJ-12. Those last two are videos. www.nightfrightshow.com. Just click on tonight's guest book cover. That'll take you right to a place where you can get his books. And also, I'm going to put the link for Stanton's website right there. Thank you again, Stanton. Thank you. Folks, I'm Brent Holland from Night Fright. Thank you all for joining us. Keep the emails coming. Have a nice night.
You're listening to Night Fright and your host, Brent Holland. The time is now. Your voice in the dark for paranormal and conspiracy radio.